to questioning what it truly means for the next architecture of the world. The Atlantic today isn't merely reopening old routes. It's reshaping power, redistributing opportunity, and definitely reconnecting people and continents. Morocco's Atlantic vision is, at its core, a bold exercise in geoeconomic design. Why Morocco? Well, a very famous British rock and roll band said it best. The mighty arms of the heavens, of Atlas, hold the heavens from earth. No Led Zeppelin fans in the room today. So, yeah, so that name, Atlas, that lent this name to the Atlantic Ocean. I tell you, it's no coincidence why it's Morocco. So now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor and pleasure to call on stage my very distinguished speakers for this session. I first call Mr. Ambassador of the Kingdom of Morocco to the United States of America, Mr. Youssef Amrani. And it's also my pleasure to call on stage former Foreign Affairs Minister of Portugal and member of the Académie du Royaume, Mr. Paulo Portas.
Okay.
Okay. So let me begin with a foundational question, Ambassador Amrani. Which priorities are truly reshaping Morocco's Atlantic posture, and what are their transformative effects across the continent, Africa?
Well, thank you. Very happy to be here with friends. He's taking pictures, starting. Paolo, you're not allowed to do so. Listen, I think that Mr. Inawi was saying at the beginning that when we started working in the Atlantic dialogues in 2012, the world was different. Mm-hmm. Indeed, because today power is shifting, and in this context, complicated context, clarity becomes a priority. And this is exactly the vision of His Majesty King Mohammed VI towards the Atlantic Initiative and Atlantic region. Because the concept was clear. We cannot build up coherent regional schemes with outdated tools. And always, I see him here, my friend and colleague and advisor of His Majesty Azoulay was always saying, history is knocking at our doors. Whether we are at the level of the expectation and ambitions of our people, or we are failing. So today, I think the proposed vision of His Majesty is a framework that structures order, that structures stability, connectivity, and opportunity. These are the 4 I's: inclusion, innovation, integration, and last one, I forgot, in-how to come later on. So today, before discussing or responding to your question about the project and the importance and of the initiative, I will say that stability is important today. Without stability, we are moving nowhere. Look at the situation in the Sahel. How is it? The situation in the Maghreb, in Libya, and elsewhere. And I will say the most important shift, and I know, Paulo, you will talk about it, is the last resolution of the United Nations on the Sahara issue. Not only it brings stability, it is conformity with the international legality, but it helps to move forward in the settlement of the issue, placing the autonomy initiative as the only solution to move forward. No, as far as your, you want me to talk about the project?
Exactly, and
Okay,
transformative
I-
assets for Africa.
Africa. I would be very brief because I know you won't always be brief. Otherwise, you would interrupt me. The first project.
I would, very diplomatically at
No,
least.
no. The first project, I call it the Dakhla Atlantique corridor. This is, I think, something strategic, not only to face the situation of instability in the Sahel, but to give access to the Atlantic to the Sahel countries to do business, to export their critical minerals, to import, and this, I think, it's a very important element and tool to these landlocked countries. The other second project which is important is the Dakhla Atlantique port, and the third one is the Nigeria-Morocco gas pipelines, and the future energy routes between the north and the south. What is important, and I would like to say that, it is about connecting people and networks, energy. Sometimes we forget also about building bridges between people and cultures. It's also important. It is good to connect gas networks, agriculture, it's there, but I will just give an example with two people sitting there. One is about the Gnawa festival. It's about connecting the Africa with the North. And the second one, in 2 weeks, we have the African football here. This is soft power. It's important that we play together, but we plan together for the future and we work together.
Yeah, and we will get back to this role that Morocco has been historically playing, like connecting Europe to Africa to also the rest of the world. But before, first of all, congratulations, Mr. Portas, for your nomination as a member of the Académie du Royaume. Very recent nomination, so congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you for His Majesty.
So before asking my question, I know that you have a tribute to pay to someone or to an institution.
Sorry?
So before we got started, you mentioned a certain tribute to an institution.
It's first of all, thank you very much to again the Atlantic Dialogues. That means we don't change geography and we don't change history. The only two things that don't change when everything changes around you. Okay? So we are Atlantic. Not only, but mainly Atlantic. So I want to pay tribute to the American diplomacy with consistency, persistency, and smart moves. 2025 was more or less the golden year of Morocco diplomacy. Why? Because in a world of uncertainty, in a world of surprises, in a world of that confuses diplomacy with reality shows, Morocco solved politically and diplomatically the Sahara question. And this was a persistent effort of diplomacy without coercion, without threats, with soft power, enlarging consensus and reducing hostilities. You had the change on the Spanish position, the change on the French position, the change on the UK position, the change on the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Belgium position, namely Netherlands and Luxembourg. Portugal didn't change, just reaffirmed, because we never had a pro-Polisario branch in our internal politics, relevant. And it was unexpected how in 2025 the Security Council of the United Nations, that is 90% deadlocked by double vetoes, approved the resolution that considers the autonomy plan of Morocco the only viable solution and mentions in precise words that the autonomy of Sahara will be conducted under Moroccan sovereignty. it's a big achievement. Mainly in this world. That means that all problems are solved? No. But this was a major. And by the way, I was impressed by the talent to get an abstention of Russia. That also means that they can't make 5 wars at the same time, okay? So, this said about the relevance of, there is another shift on the shift, or if you want, confirmation, reinforcement of the Morocco policy. Morocco is back to Africa, or as a renewed and even more relevant African external policy. And that was a big change some years ago. If you go from Rabat to, I travel by professional and academic reasons, I have to travel through Africa every month. If you go to, at least, and I'm being pessimistic, if you go from Rabat to Abidjan, you may watch immediately the influence of Morocco. The banks of Morocco, the insurance companies of Morocco, the infrastructure companies of Morocco, the cultural exchanges with Morocco. So Morocco has a traditional good relation with the United States, and maybe we can discuss why it's so relevant. It has a natural proximity with Europe, and it's now, I remember, I was impressed with the number of votes that reintegrated Morocco in African Union. Yeah. 42 supporters in 54. And it's back to reality in a way. Morocco acts as a regional power in Africa. And that's a good change, in my opinion, because stability matters.
Yes.
And you're not living an era of big stability, neither internationally nor in Africa. As Youssef remembered, one should be worried with now 10 attempts of coup d'etat in Africa in the last 4 years. It's not a progress, because it's reducing the basic meaning of democracy is institutions. When you destroy institutions, when you remove institutions, sooner or later you have chaos. And Morocco is a critical country for stability. Just pay attention to the Maghreb or to the continent.
Let me step in here, Mr. Portas, to also, because you said that 2 things don't change, history and geography. So history shows us that when global corridors
Some guys try to change history, but it's a little bit tough. Okay.
So, yeah, but it really shows us that when global corridors shift, powers must adapt.
Mm-hmm.
Or risk irrelevance, as you just mentioned. What's historical lesson, one lesson, should Europe draw up as it defines its role in the Atlantic, so we get back to our topic, and in Africa?
It's Youssef, or
it's for you.
Both.
Okay.
Just to build up on what you
Okay, thank you.
You said.
First of all, you have to capture attention of Europe. And happily, Europe is too busy on the East Europe.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm not criticizing what we are living in the eastern of Europe, in the east side of Europe. It's very relevant. It's possibly the most relevant threat we lived since 1945, because to make short a long story, if Russia prevails in Ukraine, Russia will not stop in Ukraine. The next step, the next border, it's inside European and NATO territory, or the Baltics or Poland. And don't forget, I know in digital era, Yesterday was yesterday is prehistory. But just remember 25 years. Russia sent military troops to 8 external nations, 8 external states, all former members of Soviet Union. Ukraine is the last. If they prevail, and they can prevail if United States abandons Ukraine, why shouldn't they try the Baltics and test Article 5 of NATO? So there is a reason for Europe to be worried with what matters there. But 2 or 3 things I would say, to be brief. First of all, more than a French policy, more than an Italian policy, more than a German policy or a Portuguese policy for Africa, there are no many European countries knowing Africa. And it's difficult to ask the High Representative for Foreign Policy to think about Africa.
Because
She's a
Ukraine.
Baltic. She's a Baltic, a little bit too far. But we need a more European vision for Africa.
Yes.
Second, with not a single detail of condescendency. It's a relation between independent states and partnerships. Third, Africa has an average age. It's a fantastic future and a fantastic challenge. The African average age is 17. The European average age is 44. And the Portuguese one, 47. So, if you don't exchange possibilities, opportunities, if you don't bring capitals and technologies in a sovereign relation framework between equals, Africa will knock the door of Europe. It's human. So you have to build opportunities in Africa and help on capitals, innovation, technologies, and transparency.
So, speaking of opportunities in Africa, Ambassador Amrani, how can the Atlantic become a catalyst rather than a constraint for African development?
Okay, before answering your question, I want to react about Europe, because I know Europe very well. I might agree with him that Europe is looking east for many reasons. And Anna Palacios is looking at me, as she knows what I'm saying. Unfortunately, the European Union has not the necessary tools and the necessary ambition towards Africa. We have this EU-Africa dialogue, but finally, Morocco is in the crossroad, in the corridor between Europe and Africa. And we want to play this role. Because at the end of the day, what is important is how we transform this reality into a space, a coherent strategic region where policies converge with the ambitions. But I will add that we are doing, and we need to do our own homework as African, building regional coherent schemes. Unfortunately, the Maghreb is not working. His Majesty himself, in his speech on October 31, calls and sent a special message to the Algerian president to build up, because without Maghreb, we cannot interconnect the networks. And the Maghreb is a priority. Africa also is a priority in Moroccan foreign policy. Even yesterday, the Minister of Foreign Affairs was in Burkina Faso. And so what is important is how to link all these networks. Moroccan companies, and we should not forget the role of the private sector, is essential. Because at the end of the day, what matters the more is doing business in Africa. And we need, as I said earlier, to do our own homework internally. Why? Because intra-trade in Western Africa is below 18%. Logistics costs are 3 times higher than Asia. 45% of the agricultural products are lost due to poor storage. Millions of Africans are cut from the value chains. So this initiative of His Majesty is a game changer. Is a game changer as far as tools, as far as ambition. For us, integration is not a slogan. It's a necessity. And you have this experience in Europe, in infrastructure. And the governance, as you were saying earlier, is essential. So by 2050, we will host the majority of the population. America is the future. And we are convincing our American partners in the White House, in the State Department, of the importance of Africa. Morocco understood this since a long time. We are celebrating 20 years of free trade agreement with the US, this transatlantic link. We are hosting maneuvers, military maneuvers, in Africa because stability matters. So Morocco champions all these initiatives according to the same fundamentals and principles you have said. Through equal partnership, no dependency. We do our own homework, but we need to be partners. Through African ownership in the political decision also. But we should not forget also that we should to build up coherent integration scheme and democratic system in our continent, and through regional ministerial framework. And we are doing this in Morocco. So integration is essential. Innovation, another E is innovation, because we need to have the necessary tools. Free trade agreement in Africa is one of, because at the end of the day, what matters today is to respond to the expectations of our young generation in Africa, as far as job creation, as far as promotion of growth. And this is exactly the vision of His Majesty. Investing in Africa, creating this network, these corridors, in food security, innovation also is essential. And OCP is doing a fantastic job in Africa. So what is important today is that Morocco, and as you said earlier, diplomatically want to be a strategic partner. We need to do our own homework, bring our added value, and work with our partners in Europe and in the US, and the rest of the world. This is, I think, the vision behind this initiative.
But which partnerships do you see, Ambassador Amrani? What type of partnerships? Should they be more political, industrial, maybe financial, that can most effectively, concretely implement at scale this role of connecting, of bridges that you mentioned in the beginning?
Multidimensional partnership in climate change, political dialogue is important, military cooperation, but intelligence is important, because you cannot fight. One country alone cannot fight against all these kind of challenges. Illegal migration, terrorism, deconstructing the jihadist narrative in the south.
Under what scope, Ambassador Amrani?
And could be bilaterally and multilaterally. Morocco is doing this bilaterally with the US. Morocco is doing within the advanced status with the European Union. We have a political dialogue. We have a free trade agreement. We are even participating in communitary. When he received me, the gentleman, in 2012, I think. You were foreign minister. I was secretary.
We were bankrupted.
Yeah, bankrupted. Both of us. I was secretary.
And my policy was follow the money, follow the money, follow the money. Okay?
I was at that time Secretary General of the Mediterranean Union. He received me in this beautiful palace in the Foreign Ministry of Lisbon. I asked him one thing. I please ask him, please give me one of Portuguese diplomats to work with me. And you gave me Isabel,
Yes.
So, and we're doing this at the level of the European Union. We are the major partner for the EU, and we want to play this role of connecting people, networks, and governments. Unfortunately, we need more ambition for our partners. Morocco is clear. We are working. We are using all the tools to free trade, even free trade agreements where we are deficit. We are committed and respecting. So multidimensional cooperation in field of security is essential also.
Of course.
Migration. So as
so you said we need more ambition from our partners.
From Europe, for example.
Who are you pointing to?
I'm the Europeans, I
Okay,
cannot talk about
so-
what I'm accredited to the US.
Okay.
It's a good partner for us.
Yeah, we have a European with us, so maybe he might answer to this because it's at the core of our
This
conversation.
is more
Where
relevant
is,
for the
where
north
is
of
Europe in this
than
dynamic
to the south,
of the Atlantic, of the South, and what steps, concrete steps, is Europe ready to take in order to be part of this shift, of this global shift? Because, yes, Indo-Pacific is very important, but Atlantic has been historically important and will stay as.
Look at the thing. There is one thing we cannot ignore, the epicenter of economic growth of the world and the epicenter of the technological innovation in the world migrated to Indo-Pacific region. This said, Africa partnership is a big challenge because the Atlantic unifies North America, South America, Europe, and Africa. It's a big market, a big opportunity, and a big challenge. But to build this policy, you need a more stable relation between partners of the Northern Hemisphere, I mean US and Europe. We are not living the best days of that relation. And then
Isn't it
we
an
need,
opportunity to build more partnerships?
yes,
Maybe with the
we
South.
should. But I want to call your attention to one thing. If you take some steps back and some distance, you feel that in this century, after, and more, even more, much more after the pandemic, China benefited from America running away from Africa, as we all know. But China is investing less in Africa since 2020. Little detail. So the level of investment of China in Africa is declining. Second, United States, it's a bit inconstant, if I may say a diplomatic word. Because you have a Democrat president or a classic Republican president, and he wants to have relevant presence in Africa. You remember that the last travel of President Biden was to Angola and Cabo Verde. But then you have an isolationist era, and what matters in Africa is rare earths and energetic logistics and energy logistics. Africa is much more than that. Europe is more constant, even if fragmented.
Speaking about resources of
No.
other things. Oh, okay,
Obviously,
okay.
Europe has no oil and has no gas, so
No, but
enough
I mean,
gas.
I mean,
so
of the vision of
we,
Africa.
no,
I
we
would say,
cannot.
yeah.
We will. It's expectable that Europe will relax the calendar of energetic transition. You can't build the energetic transition against the economy and against employment. You will relax, but you won't change direction. Because we have what we have, we don't have what we don't have. Europe has no oil, Europe has few gas. So we need renewables. Okay, not with the same speed, but we have to make that transition, and we should accept the nuclear as a clean energy and invest on R&D to hydrogen. Okay, this said, pay attention. I would try to modernize the European vision about Africa. First of all, I will not teach the Africans how to be African. First question, okay? This said, and this accepted, why when the Western intellectuals look at Africa, they just think about oil? Africa has the largest potential on renewable energies of the world. By the way, I always say to my students,
20 seconds.
okay? I always say to my students that one of the 3 largest solar panels in sites in the world, it's in Morocco, 1 hour from Lisbon. And the third thing is, don't forget digitalization. It's my last remark, digitalization is a huge opportunity to reduce peripheric origins. So you can be in the middle of Africa, working to New York, if you have the logistic internet infrastructure. So you don't need to be in a central country. You can be peripheric and centralized. This will change the world and the work. Okay, and the other thing is digitalization. I believe in the African Continental Free Trade Agreement or Free Area Agreement. It's a big opportunity. It's 17% of intra-African trade. But one of the best possibilities for Africa is the digital world. Because digital world is a huge opportunity for new generations, and it's one reason to stay, not to leave, if you have infrastructure.
I just want to add one word.
Knowledge. Yes,
Yeah, one word.
Ambassador Amrani, one
I
word.
think I'm speaking from African perspective. So Africa should cease to be an arena of competition between Europe, America, and so on. We need African to set our own agenda, to negotiate with strength, because it is at the end of the day, on critical minerals, on energy transformation. We need also to influence global decisions. That's why we are creating institutions and tools. And we need to shape the international rules, because we should not just be dependent from other decisions. This is the African perspective, and this is, I think, the objective of His Majesty's vision. I lost a small paper here.
Yes.
It was for you, but anyhow.
May I say one ironic thing is, don't
I
forget,
knew that this conversation
just one
would
detail.
be endless.
Don't forget, Youssef,
Just
you
one word.
solved
Yeah.
Sahara
Yes.
through multilateralism.
Yes, yes. I did
Through
criticize multilateralism. We believe in multilateralism, and we'll continue to do so. But we're not in a space of competition. This is for you. I'll give it to you after the meeting.
Thank you, Ambassador Amrani. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fortas.
Thank you.
Panelists
sure
are
we'll
asked to
continue
remain
it
on
later.
stage for a group photo.
Yes. Hi.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. The second plenary session of the Atlantic Dialogues, Unlocking the Next Stage, Rethinking Growth Strategies, will now begin. Session of the Atlantic Dialogues, Unlocking the Next Stage, Rethinking Growth Strategies, will now begin.
Sí, pero es un paso.
No, es un paso gigante, pero lo que no puedes decir es lo que no dice.
Tú evitarás que el PP cambie.
No, no, no cambia.
El cambio de España,
Esto es
¿no?
circunstancial. Es
Ok,
porque que
pero...
Khadija Ihsan, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? I think I can talk without the mic. Okay. Okay, so we will proceed with a topic that personally, as a journalist and as a moderator, and as someone who spends her life literally listening to leaders, experts, and citizens, I feel that the world is not moving like a map anymore, but it's moving like a constellation. Technologies are definitely reshaping, and we've been hearing about it since the beginning of this Atlantic dialogues, and it's in all conversations. Technologies, AI, reshaping our mindsets, reshaping our societies, reshaping our economies faster than policies can catch up. So I've learned one thing through years of covering transitions and crisis, namely, real transformations never arrive softly. Industrial transformation, post-war reconstruction, digital age certainly won't and didn't. Sorry. So this session, ladies and gentlemen, is about reimagining the very architecture of competitiveness and productivity. And it's my immense pleasure to call now on stage my very distinguished speakers, and I'll start with Mr. Masoud Ahmed, President Emeritus of the Center of Global Development. She is Fellow and Deputy Director of Stimson Center, Lana Blake, ladies and gentlemen. And then I now welcome on stage Mr. Carlos Lopez, Honorary Professor at the Mandela School of Public Governance at the University of Cape Town. And last, but by no means least, Professor Arkibi Okubai, British Academy Global Professor at the University of London. And before we get started, let's follow this introductive video of this session.
Across the globe, traditional models of economic growth are reaching their limits. What once worked no longer meets the challenges of our time, from technological disruption to climate urgency and a fragmented global order. As these pressures reshape the global landscape, a new question emerges. What does growth mean today? Can progress still be measured by numbers alone, or by how societies become more innovative, inclusive, and sustainable? In response, nations and businesses are now testing new paths, where digital transformation, green transitions, and human potential drive development, rethinking how value is created, how opportunity is shared, and how resilience is built. As these transformations unfold, the future of growth will depend not only on how fast we advance, but on the purpose that guides us. The challenge is clear. Can we design growth that truly serves both people and the planet and delivers prosperity fit for the 21st century? What does growth mean in a world defined by digital and ecological transitions? How can emerging economies position themselves in this evolving landscape?
And before answering these questions, among others, by our experts, I would now invite the audience to interact by answering to this very simple question on the application. It's the one-word question. What is the most overrated idea in development today? AI, overrated. Sovereignty, security, AI. Okay, we'll give it 15 more, 20 more seconds. Empowerment, corruption. Interesting. Growth. So, growth is an overrated idea in development today. Democracy. Okay. Okay. So, democratically, I think in AI has won as the most overrated idea in development today? Mr. Massoud. So my question is very simple. How would you define growth today?
Look, I would define growth today in the core sense in much the same way we've defined it before, which is how can you improve lives and living standards for people in a country? And the only way you do that is by increasing the level of income. And that's just another way of saying growth. But it's more complicated now than it used to be. And it's more complicated because we don't just want average levels of income to go up, which is what growth measures. We're concerned about how they're shared because we're worried about inequality and we want it to be inclusive. We're also much more conscious that with increased economic activity, you get increased carbon emissions. And now we have more concerned about how to reduce the amount of carbon emissions for any given level of economic activity because climate poses a real budget for us. And also, we're much more concerned that growth isn't the same as jobs. You can have growth in a number of countries with many jobs being created or with very few jobs being created. So I think we're concerned about many aspects of what we want, and it's also become more complicated to deliver them. You know, we had AI up on the screen. Technology is disrupting it. I mean, you can say it's overrated in the hype, but in terms of what it will do to the way in which manufacturing is done, services are done, government's work, it's going to transform that over time. So that makes it more difficult. And the other thing is that the international context is very much more complex now. Before, you know, you got on with it, the rules were clear, you produced, you went up the manufacturing ladder, you went from bicycles to motorcycles to refrigerators to cars, and you added value. And now, every time you do that, you run the risk of somebody putting a tariff on it or having protection. So the international context, politics is getting much more into the middle of growth, and that makes it more complicated. The last thing I'll say is, well, what does this mean for governments who are trying to help move this along? I think one thing is that you have to think of intelligent partnerships between governments and the private sector. There's always been some element of partnership, but now we have to think much more strategically about what you might call industrial policy, you might call it strategic partnership, but that's really important now. And you have to be much more agile at being able to change. The speed of change has accelerated. So what you could afford to take 10 years, and it's not just a question for emerging markets, I would say many rich countries are struggling to change their economies, keeping up with the speed at which the changes are made. You know, Morocco is a big exporter of cars now. That wasn't the case 2 decades ago, but the cars that Morocco exports today are not going to be the cars that Morocco has to export in 10 years because there has to be many more electric cars in 10 years. And that's the speed of change we have to transform. Mm-hmm. So this constant change that is needed, and for that you need a human capital base that is going to be much more adept at coping with technology, coping with change. And I think in many countries, the Achilles heel is going to be, do we have enough of the people who are going to be able to deliver in the new context for growth?
Exactly. Building up on the human capital, I'll turn to Lana. So the system, as we know it today, that's mainly influenced, especially in the West, by major tech companies, and they're really shifting the paradigms within the economics, and especially for the middle class. So building up on what Mr. Massoud just stated, what's your stand toward, first, this new system, and two, toward building this youth, this human capital that would respond not only to this very over-capitalistic system, and also to this technological shift that we're living in.
Thank you, Khadija. Is it working?
Yes, it is.
It is important to include the youth. They are the future. And we cannot develop and build this world without them. And I feel like there is a huge gap happening right now with AI and the technology, because humanity all over the world, not just in developed countries, but even in developing countries, they are suffering because there is a huge now shift and creating a huge kind of disaster, human disaster. A lot of people were gonna fall into poverty because of this shift in technology, and they are not prepared for new jobs. And that is the role of governments and policymakers, how to prepare the youth for this AI and new technology, or we will lose the youth. And I want to take it into the social and institutional perspective. 82 billion, including the population of the world, is 8.2 billion, including over 1.2 billion young people aged 15 to 24. Roughly 20% of youth worldwide are not in employment, education, or training. That's huge. And this, in North Africa precisely, this figure rises to 22 to 23%, illustrating the gap between talent and opportunity. Economic conditions add pressure. Global growth is projected at 3.1 to 3.3% in 2025, while global inflation remains around 3.6, with higher levels in emerging markets. These realities demonstrate that traditional GDP-focused strategies are insufficient. Growth must integrate resilience, social protection, and institutional capacity. Technological transformation offers both opportunity and risk. AI, digital finance, e-commerce, and renewable energy are generating new sectors and improving productivity. But without inclusive access, workforce readiness, and sound governance, these advances can widen inequality rather than foster shared prosperity. North Africa illustrates this dynamic. Emerging markets in North Africa, startups and renewal projects are growing, yet youth unemployment remains high, highlighting the importance of pairing innovation and inclusion. The next stage of growth rests on three strategic pillars. Invest in adaptive institutions. Effective governance and regulatory framework determine whether innovation and social programs translate into real impact. Design markets for inclusion. Policies and incentives must integrate informal sectors, SMEs, and marginalized communities into growth opportunities. Embed systematic foresight. Growth strategies should anticipate shocks from climate to security and supply chain disruptions, and embed flexibility into fiscal, social, and technological planning. In short, the next stage of growth is not just about faster GDP expansion, it's about creating strategies that reflect the realities of our societies, harness human potential, and protect youth amid global uncertainty. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. I'll turn to Carlos. So Lena just gave us like a very broad global perspective on, especially on the youth and public policies and this huge technological shift. Let's talk about our African perspective and emerging economies. So these economies must navigate between major geoeconomic shifts and also seize opportunities. So how can these emerging economies become co-authors of the next development paradigms in the continent of Africa?
Well, the short answer is that they already are. We have a dislocation of the center of gravity from the traditional countries that have, produced wealth to others that are now competing, global south in general. And Africa, paradoxically, is also part of this evolution. People don't recognize it enough because the narratives are always pessimistic about Africa. But then you group all African countries, meaning you don't divide them, slice them like North Africa, Sub-Saharan. If you just talk about the continent as a whole, and you talk about the other continents as a whole, because it's very easy to say emerging Asia, and then you put all the good ones in one corner, and then you talk about the rest of Asia. Then you say, you see, this emerging Asia is the standard. So if you just compare continent per continent, and for that you have to do an extra effort, because the IMF will not give you the statistics that I'm going to give you, you end up with a very different picture. Africa is the continent that is growing the most from 2025 onwards. Of course, these are forecasts. So we have surpassed Asia.
But then it depends on the very definition
I'm
of growth.
I'm coming.
Okay.
So then we have 40 countries out of the 54 that are above the world average. We have 13 out of 20 that are fastest growing. You can go on with the statistics, and people say, where is it? Where is this growth? How can you explain that Niger is in a complete disaster in terms of governance and territorial integrity, but it's actually having incredible growth, between 6 and 8%, depending on the last year.
Exactly.
So then you end up